So, hello everybody, and welcome to today's 10 YFP Working Group webinar. This is the second and last webinar of 2017, and today we will be talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and how sustainable public procurement, consumer information, and sustainability standards and eco-labels fit into this global framework. Before starting, just a few housekeeping rules. Everybody is muted right now. If you want to ask a question, you can either put it in the question box on your control panel to the right, or you can click the raise hand button next to your name on the control panel as well. And then during the Q&A session, I will read your questions or unmute you. This webinar is recorded, and we will share the recording and the slides after the webinar. So we have three presentations lined up today. The first is from Bettina Heller, who is an Associate Program Officer at UNEP, and she will explain how the 10 YFP Sustainable Public Procurement Programs and the consumer information programs link to the SDGs and seek to implement some specific sustainable development goals. Then I will take the floor again and explain ISIL's work on sustainability standards, and more specifically report that ISIL and WWF have recently developed around sustainability standards and market transformation, and how this fits into the Sustainable Development Goal agenda. And the last presentation will be from Ms. Linda Scott Jacobsen, who is public procurement specialist and a researcher at Swedwatch, which is a Swedish NGO, and she will illustrate her experiences and experiences from several Swedish communes and cities in implementing sustainable public procurement and how this links to the SDGs. Before handing over the floor to our first speaker, just for everybody's information, the Sustainable Development Goals are a global agenda that was adopted by the UN General Assembly last year. They consist of 17 goals and 169 global targets and many more indicators. And they are set to shape not only government policies and priorities in development aid or other areas, but they also are increasingly having an impact and influence in how the private sector views sustainability and acts on sustainability. Just quickly before I hand over the word to Bettina about the working group and its mission. So basically the working group has been functioning for several years now as a sharing platform between experts and practitioners in the procurement world, and on the other side, experts and practitioners in the standards and eco-label world. So we have been highlighting best practices, sharing examples and other experiences, and we've also tried to highlight new opportunities and challenges for both these groups. We've talked about the EU directives on public procurement. We've also talked about claims management and public procurement and standard setting. So we really try to bring together topics that are of interest to both these groups, which can learn from each other. The 2016 in-person meeting has unfortunately had to be delayed, and we are planning to hold it next year, and we will all inform you over mail on this. Without further waiting, I will now give the floor to Bettina for the first presentation. Bettina, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, David. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to speak to all of you today. I'm just going to give a quick overview of how the 10 YFP programs, and in particular the ones on sustainable public procurement and consumer information, fit in the context. I believe that all of you are pretty aware of the 10YFP and its programs. I think also all of you are partner of at least one of the programs. But maybe this slide is of interest to just highlight again that there are 6 10YFP programs, and they contribute to different SDGs. So one of the important SDGs where the 10YFP is explicitly mentioned is SDG number 12, which is about ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. And target 12.8 actually refers to the implementation of the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production, or short, the 10YFP. It says that all countries should take action and developed countries should take the lead. But then there is also another SDG where the 10YFP is specifically referred to, which is in SDG 8, which is about promoting sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. And more particular, it's target 8.4, which talks about improving global resource efficiency in consumption and production to decouple economic growth from environmental degradation in accordance with the 10YFP. So those 2 targets are specifically referring to the 10YFP, but then there are a couple of others that are important. So this slide gives you an overview. You see that a lot of them are on SDG 12, but then there's also some more particular on SDG 8, 14, 2, and 4, and 11. So I won't go into detail, but we'll share the slides, and in case you are interested to learn more about the other programs and if there are any SDGs that you are particularly interested in, then you might also be interested to get in touch with those other programs. If we can please go to the next. Thank you. So I first want to talk about how the Consumer Information Program links to the SDGs, and I will focus in particular on SDG 12.8, which is that by 2030 ensure that people everywhere have the relevant information and awareness for sustainable development and lifestyles in harmony with nature. So since this one talks about information, it's of course of particular importance to the Consumer Information Program. If we can please go to the next slide. I want to talk about one tool that we have been developing under the program, also with a view to addressing SDG target 12.8. Those are our guidelines for providing product sustainability information. And it is a document that has been developed in a very collective process. It was a 1.5 consensus finding exercise with over 30 international experts, and it was a working group under the Consumer Information Program. Well, it still is much like this working group, so we have regular webinars where we discuss drafts of the guidelines and try to incorporate what's already existing to come up with an internationally agreed document. There are 2 objectives. One is to set minimum requirements to remove the potential for greenwashing. So this is the minimum, the musts that you have to meet if you want to communicate on your product sustainability performance. And the second objective is more to encourage leadership over time. So it is really you have to meet the musts, but then you should always try to improve and go beyond what is required to never stop where you currently are, but always try to come up with more innovative approaches, etc. The guidelines themselves are for companies, retailers, government bodies, and labeling bodies, but also other stakeholders that are involved in the provision of information or provision of the framework for providing information. So those stakeholders we expect to follow and apply the guidelines. And the ultimate aim is to enhance consumer awareness, ease, and uptake of sustainable choices. So this is where we clearly link back to SDG target 12.8, which is about the provision of reliable information and the choices that can be made according to that information. The document includes a couple of high-level principles, which I'm going to show to you in a second. And if you are interested to learn more, we expect the final guidelines early next year, and we then will pilot test those guidelines on the ground with the stakeholders that I mentioned. So if you're interested to participate in that exercise or learn more, please email us. So in terms of content, as I said, it's a set of high-level principles. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is just to give you an idea what it looks like. So we do have fundamental principles, which are the minimum requirements that are referred to, which are in blue here. And then we have aspirational principles, which are the more leadership, how can I improve over time, which are portrayed in orange here. So we hope that by working together with businesses, governments, other stakeholders, and engaging them to apply the guidelines to improve the way they communicate with consumers, that this will help to meet SDG 12.8. So for us, there is quite a clear link with the SDGs, and we're also trying to make that case. If we can please go to the next slide, then we're going to cover the other part, which is on sustainable public procurement and the 10YP SPP program. And I also have to acknowledge my colleague Farid Yaka, who prepared the content for this, but unfortunately cannot join us today. So the main, of course, there's the SPP has its own target, which is 12.7, which is about promote public procurement practices that are sustainable in accordance with national policies and priorities. And actually, the indicator for this one is also already developed, which is number of countries implementing sustainable public procurement policies and action plans. If we go to the next slide, we can see the involvement of the SPP program in this exercise. So the indicator is actually the measurement of the indicator is actually developed in the framework of a working group which is led by UN Environment and is a working group of the 10YP SPP program, the working group 2D. If you'd also like to have more information about this working group, please just drop us a line after the webinar. A call for proposal for the development of a measurement methodology is planned to be launched. This will be done by UN Environment before the end of December 2017. We can please go to the next slide. Thank you. So I would say this is the more obvious one. Of course, there is a target that that refers directly to SPP, but then there are a number of other SDG targets where there is a potential link and where SPP can contribute, where we can make that case as well. So, for instance, there's Goal 3, which is about healthy lives and promoting well-being at all ages. And Target 3.9 more concretely talks about reducing the number of deaths and illness from hazardous chemicals and air, water, and soil pollution and contamination. So, of course, by implementing SPP, then we can also contribute to this target. Can you please go to the next? There is further Goal 5, which is about gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. So especially if we look into the social dimension of sustainability, this comes very important. Then Goal 6, we have ensuring availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, especially Target 6.4. Goal 7, which is about energy, we do have ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. So clearly again, especially the typical product groups that are covered by SPP, there is really a high potential for more energy efficiency in the products that are used. Goal 8, which is about sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth. We mentioned it before because it has a target that also refers to the 10YP. So of course, employment and decent work for all, that also has a very clear link to SPP. And again, also if we look at the social dimensions especially. can go to the next one, please. Thanks. So goal 9 also has a potential link to SPP, or more vice versa, which is about building resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustained industrialization, and foster innovation. Goal 12, of course, we already discussed, sustainable consumption and production patterns. This is also what SPP aims at, and there is their own target, 12.7. Then goal 13, take urgent action to combat climate change. So there could be more work done, especially if we look at integrating climate-friendly criteria into SPP, and also working together with the integration of labels and standards that look at climate-friendly criteria into sustainable public procurement provisions. And finally, we do have goal 15, which is about biodiversity and land degradation, as well as desertification and forest management and ecosystem reservation. So to this goal, we can also make the link to SPP, depending again on which criteria are specified in our procurement. Go to the next, but I think this was the last slide.
Yes, I think this was your last slide, Bettina, and thank you very much for that presentation. Because we are talking about the SDGs and their targets in quite a lot of detail, I put a link in the chat box to the UN website, which provides an overview to all the SDGs. So if you want to, during the webinar or afterwards, you want to find out the exact wording of each SDG and the targets and indicators, that's probably the best place to go. Now, I will continue with a presentation of some work that we at ISIL have been doing around sustainability standards and the Sustainable Development Goals. First, a quick word on the ISIL Alliance itself. So we are the Global Membership Association of Sustainability Standards. We currently have 18 members as which are standards, and we have 3 accreditation bodies. So we are a growing organization. Our members are active in a variety of sectors, and our aim is to really strengthen these standard systems and to increase both their credibility and their impacts on sustainability goals and objectives. So the SDGs have been quite a central topic for us for over the past year and before that as well. And in this context, we have developed reports together with WWF around how sustainability standards can be used as a tool by businesses, but also by other actors such as public procurers to contribute to the 2030 agenda or the Sustainable Development Goals. So this report will be finished this week, and I will send it to all the members of the working group. And this presentation will basically highlight a few observations and emphasize a few of our conclusions in this report. It's important to emphasize that first of all, this report focuses on standard systems and not so much on the use of ecolabels. And this is not to say that ecolabels do not have a role to play in the SDG agenda, but it's simply because ISIL, of course, has a very specific mandate in working with sustainability standards. Another point to make is that the report focuses mainly on a business audience, which means that sustainable public procurement is not the main focus of this report. And in this presentation as well, sustainable public procurement is very relevant in the context of the report. And at the end, I will make some links to that, but I think it's also a first step to a broader discussion about how sustainable public procurement can enable impacts across different SDGs, as Bettina already illustrated earlier. So the key points in this report are that to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals in 15 and now actually 14 years' time, we will need both government action and action from the private sector. The second point to make here, and this is also something that Bettina already highlighted, is that Goal 12 on sustainable production and consumption is an enabling goal, which means that it enables impacts and contributions to all the other SDGs. And the third main point we bring forward in the report, and that is elaborated mostly in the report, is that credible sustainability standards are key SDG tools that businesses, but also other actors can use. And this is because the majority of the SDGs are linked to the objectives and criteria that are already being implemented through existing sustainability standard systems. So what a standard does is that it defines sustainability, and in a way it translates these broad global goals into a set of very concrete measures for a specific commodity or for a specific sector or for a specific process in a global supply chain. A standard system can also provide independent verification to ensure that this specific level of sustainability performance is reached, and it allows it allows markets and governments to value this sustainable performance. So I just wanted to show you this infographic, which basically just which illustrates what I quickly explained, which is more or less the theory of change, if you will, that fits that kind of builds a foundation of the report and our thinking. So the first layer is the standard setting process, which from an ISIL point of view should happen through a transparent and multi-stakeholder process. Then the implementation of the standards, the green banner that you see, this is where the actual contributions or impacts to different sustainable development goals can happen. So if a farm adopts more efficient and better water management system, then this farm, through the adoption of that standard, will contribute to SDG 6, for example. Then the verification layer is the third layer, and then the last one is where we see how individual consumers as well as supermarkets, the finance sector, or governments can use standards and certifications to value that sustainability performance. I will quickly give a few more illustrative examples. And again, here these are quite broad, and I would urge you to read the report to learn more about how sustainability standards actually contribute in a concrete way to different goals. So I just picked a few here to make the point. Goal 2, which is around removing malnutrition, but also around agricultural productivity. There we see obviously that there's the contribution of sustainable agriculture standards, which have quite a broad coverage and are quite well known, has a very high potential to be scaled up and to further contribute to target 2.4 specifically, but also other targets under goal 2. Under goal 8, decent work and labor conditions, as excuse me, as Bettina already mentioned, this is a very relevant goal as well, and both sustainable public procurement and standards can contribute here as well. We have sector-specific standards. One of our ISIL members, Goodweave, for example, works specifically on the textile and carpet making sector in East Asia. And they have a very strong focus on labor conditions and child labor. Or you also have more general labor standards, which can be applied across a variety of sectors. Onto the more perhaps environmental SDGs, we have a strong role to play for systems which certify sustainable fishing practices, which contribute to Goal 14 on marine life protection. But there's also a strong relevance of other sustainability standards, which do not involve fishing practices, but basically prevent that farms or factories or other um, 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 producing units that they do not pollute downstream rivers, so that in the end this pollution doesn't end up in the oceans. So that's another contribution that standards can make. Obviously, Goal 15, forests and biodiversity on land, as Bettina also mentioned earlier, there's one of the key tools there is the use of sustainable forestry management, and the FSC, the Forest Europe Council, is a sustainability standard that is globally recognized as one of the best tools to actually implement that. But again, other standards in the agricultural sector, for example, they can also contribute to preventing deforestation or restoring biodiversity or high conservation areas. So Rainforest Alliance, RSPO, there are various sustainability standards which really have strong criteria and objectives around biodiversity and forest conservation. So this is just to give a very short illustration of how a few goals link to different sustainability standards. But in our report, we also try to answer the question about how can you actually understand the impact that sustainability standard has, and how that actually links to the SDG framework and the targets. So of course, the first step that has to be taken is assessing how a given sustainability standard is relevant to the SDG framework. And there, of course, you have to look at the goals and the targets, as me and Bettina have done. And you can also look further into the global indicators, or you can also look at it broader and look at the business teams that are represented in this in this specific sustainable development goal. So keeping in mind that the sustainable development goals were developed by and largely for governments, a lot of businesses are looking now to see to translate some of the indicators and targets to the private sector. So in this sense, there's also very progressive thinking being done in terms of what does the SDG framework mean for an agriculture firm, for example. And this is also, of course, something where sustainability standards play a role in. A second step then to look at is the performance level of a standard. So you can have standards which are low bar standards, which do not have very strict requirements on, for example, water management or land rights, for example. And then you will have other standards which do have very strict or very high level performance. So the impact on the SDG framework also has to be seen in that light. And lastly, what is also very important is the credibility of a standard system, and which makes that the certification or the verification system that the standard system provides can be reliable and can be trusted. And of course, this is a crucial point for ISIL. I think the key thing to note here is that while a standard which does not have which is not an ISIL member, or which is not considered to be very credible, while that standard can still have an impact, it's actually very difficult to know if that is the case. Because if a standard is not transparent, if a standard is not able to demonstrate its impact, then of course it's very hard to say whether this certification has actually had a positive impact. So quickly, just to highlight a few other, a few broader points about sustainability standards. So they do have a big role to play under SDG 12 in enabling sustainable production and consumption, but they also represent the type of partnerships that are called for under SDG 17. So a multi-stakeholder standard basically brings together all relevant players within a given industry to discuss what sustainability looks like. And it also creates a platform for interactions between private or public or NGO actors. And lastly, another key point is that they provide a uniform and comparable way of measuring progress through certification. And this means that we can measure how a whole sector is moving. And that is, of course, where we will see the biggest SDG impacts, not whether one farm gets better at managing its forest territory, but whether a whole sector within a whole country is doing that better. And there, of course, sustainability standards provide this kind of a uniform tool that can be used by all actors in that sector and not just one company. So what does this all mean for public procurers? So as we know, sustainability standards are often used to inform the technical criteria or specifications of tenders, and they can also be used as the certification can also be used as a proof of compliance. So for procurers, the use of sustainability standards really opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of monitoring compliance with the criteria that otherwise can be quite challenging. And I think in the next presentation from Linda, we will also see some practical examples of this. So briefly, this was my presentation, and as I mentioned, the report will be sent to the working group as soon as possible. Now, Linda, I will hand over the word to you. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you today. As David said in the beginning, my name is Linda Scott Jacobsen, and I am with a Swedish NGO called Swedewatch. So, and where I work with public procurement issues and also do research. I'm going to start just to briefly introduce Swedewatch and what we do. And then I will move on to give you more concrete examples of the implementation of social sustainability criteria in Sweden based on 3 case studies that we have gathered into our latest report called Agents for Change. Okay, so Swedewatch is an independent non-profit research organization. We have been around for 13 years, and we are mostly state-funded. We cover social and environmental impacts of businesses, but also investors and public actors, like in the case of public procurement. And we do that by writing reports, basically. We write or launch at least 6 reports each year based on field research and talking to local partner organizations and experts in countries within Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So those are the continents we cover. And we look at global supply chains. So mostly we look at companies that are within the supply chains of Swedish companies, so they're somehow connected to the Swedish market. And we look at different aspects of human rights violations, like women's rights and migrant workers and children, but also cover different sectors like the ICT sector, mining, textile in Bangladesh, for example. And we also use the UN Guiding Principles of Business and Human Rights as sort of a raster or a lens that we analyze the company responsibilities and their efforts and activities concerning social responsibility and how they improve working conditions in their global supply chains. When it comes to public procurement, we do 2 things. We do reports on public procurement and public actors purchasing routines, and we also have a help desk that provides support for contracting authorities in work such as developing policies and procedures to be able to include and monitor social requirements in their contracts, doing stuff like audits, risk assessments, and develop code of conduct. And we do training on this issue as well for them. So we also want to be something that they can use in their work and support them in this work and move forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so the theme for today is, can public procurement contribute to the SDGs in practice? And I will try to give input to answering this question by telling you about our latest report called Agents for Change, How Public Procurers Can Influence Labor Conditions in Global Supply Chains, case studies from Brazil, Pakistan, and Thailand. Very long title, sorry about that. And this report basically presents the Swedish example on how social requirements and criteria has been used and not used sometimes, looking at 3 case studies. The production and procurement of surgical instruments from Pakistan, processed chicken meat from Thailand, and coffee from Brazil. And Swedish contracting authorities are considered sort of forerunners when it comes to implementing social requirements and aspects into their tenders. There are 3 levels of procuring contracting authorities in Sweden. We have the state level government agencies, and then we have the county councils and regions, which are the ones who are responsible for healthcare and infrastructure. And then we have the municipalities responsible for schools, elderly homes, and public officers and different kinds and so on. And we procure goods and services for about 60 billion euros each year. And as I mentioned, Swedish contracting authorities are considered forerunners, so they do include social aspects into their tenders to some degree, and have been working in this for several years. But not all of them do, so there's a long way to go before everything is 100%. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly just mention the 3 cases that I talked about. So the first one is the surgical instruments that are produced in Sialkot in Pakistan. And this is an industrial city, and the production of these instruments are it's very big, very large, and they're exported to the European market and the market in the US and so on. Oh, something is moving. Okay, I'm just gonna continue. Okay, good, we're back. So we have been following this case for 10 years, and we did a report on it. We went to Pakistan to look at working conditions in this industry, and we discovered horrifying working conditions, really, especially among the subcontractors who are working in small workshops, as you see in these pictures. We found major health and safety issues, people not wearing protective gear, exposed to chemicals, there were no safety guards on machines and so on. We also found child labor and people working on, very common that people work on piece rates, so they are paid for each instrument that they produce, which provides them with a very low salary, which is not by far the equivalent of a living wage. And there were no unions. So what happened was that this report 10 years ago got a lot of attention in the media because the county councils and regions who were procuring these instruments for the healthcare did not include any social considerations or requirements in their tenders. So what happened was that they developed this common code of conduct which all of them use at this point, and they have also developed a system for risk assessment and monitoring of their criteria, basically using self-assessment questionnaires for their suppliers, but also doing audits, factory audit and desktop audits. And they have this nationwide collaboration between all the county councils, so it's a nationwide, really. And we went back in 2015 just to see if any improvements had been made since they started to do this work on social requirements, and we could see actually improvements concerning change of attitude among exporting firms, policies on child labor, companies providing minimum wage instead of a piece rate, which was also a step forward. But of course, still lots of problems, mainly within the health and safety area. Okay, next slide, please. So in 2015, oh, sorry, this was the last slide. Please, next slide. Yeah, thank you. So in 2015, we also released a report called Trapped in the Kitchen of the World, which covers the migrant workers in the Thai poultry production. And this is also included in our last report. So what we found is that in the production of chicken meat that is exported to Europe and Sweden and end up in the kitchen of hospitals and schools and elderly homes and so on, there is exploitation of migrant workers from Myanmar and Cambodia. So what happens is that they go to Thailand to work in these factories to earn some money. They're very poor, and they end up in debt due to recruitment fees, and their identity cards and passports are also taken away from them, so they have very limited ways to leave their work and leave the factories. And this leads up to a situation that basically defines them is defined as in line with the modern forms of slavery, according to the ILO. And we asked the contracting authorities in Sweden, well, what are you doing about this? Have you included social requirements somehow? And the answer was no. They were not aware of the risk connected to this production of these products. So this led up to contracting authorities sort of identifying, okay, so this is a risk category. We need to start including social criteria also when it comes to food items such as chicken meat. Okay, the next slide, please. So the third example is coffee, and we went to Brazil last year to do a field study, and we talked to local experts, unions, and workers in the production of coffee. So Sweden has a very high consumption of coffee compared to other countries in the world, and 10% of it is publicly purchased, actually. And Brazil is a top exporter of coffee to the world, and a lot of it is grown in the Minas Gerais state. And there's a lot of problems connected to this, including low wages, under living wage, but also child labor still, although there has been improvements in this area. So two of the problems that we identified is also connected to migrant workers, but also to the use of chemicals. So next slide, please. So what happens is that poor people from poorer states of Brazil come to Minas Gerais during the harvesting season to earn some money. And their wages are very, very low, and some of them end up in debt because they are also, some of them are not paid adequately. They might be paid by the end of the season, so they build up credit in the local store. They can't really buy food, and they have to pay for housing to their employer and so on. So when they have paid all these fees, and there is nothing left basically of the salary, and this in practice means that they can't leave the plantation. And Brazilian authorities are actually freeing people every year that are trapped at plantations in this way. And next slide, please. So there is also extensive use of toxic pesticides. So Brazil is a top consumer of pesticides because they are a large agricultural country, of course. And some of them are banned within the EU because they are so toxic and dangerous. So if you get exposed, you can develop rashes, headaches, nausea, etc. But also it can have a negative impact on reproductive systems, and there is also seen increased risks concerning cancer among farm workers and symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So we saw that a lot of these migrant workers do not use proper personal protective equipment. So it's insufficient, and they are being exposed to these chemicals. And of course it also has, it goes into the soil and water and so on. So next slide, please. So we asked the contracting authorities, do you use any social standards or criteria when it comes to coffee? And we did a very small sample survey, but it still indicates that there is a common use of certifications among the contracting authorities, and usually the coffee that they procure are certified with two labels, one that is organic and the other one that is a social aspects like fair trade, and fair trade was very commonly used. And this you can compare to Denmark, where only 1% of the coffee that is publicly procured is certified. So we could also see that the contracting authorities do not carry out any risk assessment connected to coffee, and they don't monitor the compliance of their social criteria in any other way than using the certification. So the procurers really rely heavily on the certification to fulfill what is promised. And I would also say, I don't think it's in the report, but I think that the standards, the certifications also provide them with a risk awareness. They know that there is a standard available, a certification available, so they also know indirectly that there is a risk connected to the production, and act on that. As a consequence, since Swedish contracting authorities are using fair trade and the Swedish organic label called Krav, to a high extent, they also automatically exclude Brazilian producers because they are not usually certified. It's not very common that they are fair trade or Krav certified. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to mention also that in this report, we have also included recommended steps when including social requirements. And I'm not going to go into detail because I know that we are running out of time. But just to mention, we say that we see that you need to start your process by doing risk assessment to know your risks, know when to include social requirements. So in the case of Thai poultry, for example, the contracting authorities weren't aware, so that sort of highlights this issue that you need to know your risks before you do anything else. And that goes hand in hand with the next step, which is market analysis, to know the industry and know the supply chains. And one way to know more and learn about that is really to ask questions to your suppliers. And the third step is the criteria setting, basically. Well, there are different possibilities, and I'm, of course, speaking from the EU perspective when it comes to EU regulations and legislation and the EU directive on public procurement, which highlights social considerations and really emphasizes that contracting authorities should include social requirements and consideration into their contracts. And there are different ways to go here. I mean, with the certification standard and so on, you can put it in, just like David mentioned earlier, into the technical specification, which is quite common and quite easy, but you could also use it as award criteria and contract performance clauses. And contract performance clauses is more commonly used as in the case of the county councils in Sweden, where they use these performance clauses when they refer to their code of conduct and monitor that. And the fourth step is monitoring, which is crucial in order to create change. I mean, that's what we conclude in our example from Pakistan, that you really need to carry out monitoring. And of course, if you use certification, a label, which is independent, third party, and high standard, this could be a way to monitor effectively. And step 5 is really corrective action and sanction possibilities if you see that suppliers are not complying or interested in your social requirements. Next slide, please. So going back to the question, can public procurement contribute to the SDGs in practice? Well, I would say yes, definitely, based on these cases. But there are several things needed to create change, but also and to deliver on the SDGs. And this is really what I've been talking about: doing a risk assessment, knowing your risks, doing the monitoring, and keeping close dialogue with your suppliers, using high standard certifications and independent certifications, which can be an efficient tool. And we also see that a lot of contracting authorities struggle because they don't have the time and the competence, or really the political support in working on these issues strategically. So that is also needed. Political will is very, very important. And collaboration, consolidation, and information sharing, really to build leverage, to get more people and more contracting authorities to push the suppliers in a positive direction. And explore and utilize possibilities in the EU directive. You can match different social criteria with each other and use them in all the phases possible: technical specification, award criteria, and contract performance clauses when needed. Okay, next slide. Yeah, so just to wrap up, if you have any more questions about the report, you can access the report from our website, and I think maybe David can send it out to you as well. And please approach me with any questions on email regarding our report or our findings or our help desk on social criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for very interesting presentation and the view from the front line, so to speak. So I think we can throw it open for a short Q&A. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment from our audience. Luckily, I've put some kind of wrap-up notes on this last slide, which we can quickly go over and discuss. And again, anybody from the audience who has a question, you can either type your question in the question box to the right of the control panel, or you can raise your hand by clicking the little hand icon next to your name. In terms of what we can expect from the SDGs and how it how they can be kind of a call for action for both sustainable public procurement, but also for better consumer information. I think there's, I think they're a very powerful framework. And as Linda noted, there is of course always for sustainable public procurers, there's this challenge of getting the political support they need, and in that sense, there are a question of there's a big question of, can the SDG agenda really, and then specifically Goal 12 on sustainable public procurement, can that really harness and mobilize actors to implement that. There's also the measurement challenge of how do we measure that public procurement is being implemented and how target 12.7 is being achieved. And I think there Bettina noted that there is a working group in the YFP SPP program working on this, and that will be really interesting to follow up here. For the consumer information part, I think that's another really interesting question of how can we measure that people have the necessary information available and that this information is credible, reliable, etc. So perhaps a quick question here to Bettina would be if there are any plans to roll out the consumer information guidelines and to ensure that they are also implemented within or by governments in perhaps educational programs, or perhaps even governments looking at regulating marketing or advertising practices around sustainability. Can you give us an idea of what that could look like, or how that is planned?
Yes, David, thanks. Definitely. So this is what we want to do in the pilot testing, which will start early next year. So the obvious one would, of course, you work together with companies that actually formulate their claims and see if they would comply with the principles that we are providing, or you help them to establish their new claims with the principles and test if it works. But then it's also very much we want to work with governments and see how can those principles and the guidelines help them with their legislative frameworks that they put in place to to regulate the market of sustainability information that's out there. When you were speaking about measurement, what I was thinking could be of interest also to the working group here is that the 10 YFP has now developed a monitoring and evaluation framework, which of course links closely to the SDGs, especially SDG 12, since this one is on sustainable consumption production. And this is really supposed to be a very flexible framework. So we're looking into the activities that are undertaken by the programs themselves. So this working group would be reported as something that the program is doing. But then there's also another attribution category, which is the wider portfolio. So any projects that are somehow contributing to the programs because they're connected is also recognized, but then there's also a category for others. So that would be the end goal would be to also measure anything that's happening outside of the direct influence of the 10YFP, so that this monitoring and evaluation framework can really become a global framework and a global M&E on SDG 12 and others. So this is going to be rolled out in January next year for the first period. If anybody wants to learn more about this, there was also a webinar that was recorded, so I'm happy to share that. And here we've discussed a lot on how to measure consumer information. It's an interesting point because for consumer information you really have this behavior change component, which is always a bit difficult to measure, but which is very important because as soon as we understand what actually triggers change in behavior in consumers, then of course we can target the messages that we provide in a way that they trigger behavior change. So it's something we want to look more into in the coming year. So it's definitely a topic that the program will look at.
Great, thanks, Bettina. I see that we're already over the hour here, so I will cut this short and just mention to the audience that the new Sustainable Consumption and Production Clearinghouse is now online, and I put the link in the chat box for all of you to access and explore that new database. And I also just want to call upon all of you, if you have interesting resources or examples that you want to share with the working group, please send them my way, and we will look what we can do to disseminate that. So I will keep it at that. Thank you all for joining, and have a very nice day.
Thank you all. Goodbye.